Mary Thompson was a single mother living in a small, worn-down apartment on the edge of the city. Her life was a constant struggle, juggling multiple jobs while trying to raise her 7-year-old son, Liam, in a world that seemed indifferent to their hardships. Every morning, Mary would wake before sunrise, quietly tiptoeing around the apartment so as not to wake Liam, and prepare a simple breakfast for him before rushing off to her first job at the local diner. She worked long hours, serving plates of eggs and coffee to people who barely noticed her, all the while keeping a watchful eye on the clock to make sure she could return in time to pick Liam up from his small after-school program. Despite her exhaustion, she always carried a sense of responsibility and warmth in her heart that refused to be dimmed by the weight of life's challenges. On this particular evening, as the orange glow of sunset began to fade behind the tall, crowded buildings of the city, Mary was walking home from the diner with Liam holding her hand tightly. Liam had a small, worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder, and his sneakers tapped lightly against the cracked sidewalk. Mary was tired, her feet aching, and her stomach still empty from the long day, but she forced a smile when Liam looked up at her and asked if they could stop by the small park near their apartment. She nodded, wanting to give her son a moment of joy even though she knew their budget barely allowed for such indulgences. As they neared the park, Mary noticed a figure sitting alone on the edge of the sidewalk under the flickering light of a street lamp. The man was elderly, his hair completely gray, and his clothes were worn and dirty. His face was lined with age and hardship, and his hands shook slightly as he held an empty tin cup in front of him. He looked around, as if hoping someone might notice him, yet his eyes carried a deep sadness that made Mary pause in her steps. She felt a sudden pang in her heart, recognizing a reflection of the world's harshness in his tired gaze. Liam tugged gently on her sleeve, sensing her hesitation. "Mom, he looks hungry," Liam said softly. Mary knelt down to Liam's level and whispered, "You're right, honey. Let's help him." She reached into her bag and pulled out the small sandwich she had saved for Liam's lunch, now wrapped neatly in wax paper. "Sir, would you like some food?" she asked gently, extending it toward the man. The elderly man's eyes widened with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. He looked at Mary, then at Liam, then back at the sandwich, as if unable to believe that anyone would offer kindness without expecting anything in return. thank you so much," he murmured, his voice trembling. Mary smiled warmly and said, "Here, take it. We have enough to share." Liam watched intently, his small hands folded together as if in prayer, and Mary felt a deep sense of pride swelling in her chest. She could see the relief in the man's eyes as he accepted the sandwich carefully, almost reverently, and took a small bite. The street around them seemed to fade for a moment, the honking cars, the distant voices, and the rush of city life were replaced by the quiet, simple connection between a stranger and a mother trying to do the right thing. The man ate slowly, savoring each bite, and Mary noticed tears forming at the corners of his eyes. "God bless you," he whispered again, his voice now a little steadier. Mary reached out and gently placed her hand on his arm. "It's nothing, sir. We all need a little help sometimes," she said softly. Liam, still holding his mother's hand, added, "Yeah, everyone deserves food." Mary chuckled softly, ruffling his hair. "That's right, Liam. And sometimes, even a little food can make a big difference." They stayed there for a few more moments, making sure the man had eaten enough, and even shared some water from Mary's small bottle. Then, as the evening grew darker and the city lights flickered on, Mary and Liam prepared to leave. "Are you going to be okay?" Mary asked the man. He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Yes, yes, thanks to you. You reminded me that there are still kind people in this world, he said. Mary smiled, feeling a warmth she hadn't experienced in a long time. Take care of yourself, she said, before gently guiding Liam away. As they walked home, Liam looked up at his mother with wide, thoughtful eyes. Mom, do you think he'll be okay tonight? He asked. Mary paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill her lungs. I hope so, honey. We did what we could, and sometimes, that's all anyone can do, she replied, squeezing his hand. Liam nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer, though Mary could see the concern still lingering in his eyes. They continued walking, passing the familiar shops and street corners, and Mary thought about the fragile lives that often went unnoticed in the city: the homeless, the elderly, the lonely, and the forgotten. She thought about how easy it could have been to walk past the man, to ignore him like so many others did every day, and a shiver ran down her spine as she realized how small actions could carry so much weight. Mary knew her life was far from perfect. Bills piled up on her kitchen counter, her apartment was cramped and worn, and the future often seemed uncertain. But in that moment, she felt a spark of hope, a reminder that even in the hardest times, human kindness could create something beautiful and meaningful. As they approached their apartment building, Mary glanced back once more, wondering if the elderly man would find shelter for the night, and silently wished him peace and comfort. Liam yawned, leaning against her shoulder, and Mary felt the exhaustion of the day settle into her bones. Yet, despite her tiredness, she felt lighter, as if the simple act of helping someone else had lifted a small weight from her heart. She carried her son up the narrow stairwell to their apartment, unlocking the door and stepping inside, where the familiar smells of home greeted them. Liam ran to his small bed and climbed under the blanket, and Mary tucked him in, smoothing his hair and whispering a quiet good night. She watched him drift off to sleep, his chest rising and falling rhythmically, and thought about the man they had helped earlier. She didn't know his name, where he had come from, or where he would sleep tonight, but she knew that for a few moments, they had made a difference in his life. That thought brought a small smile to her lips as she turned to the tiny kitchen to prepare a cup of tea for herself. She leaned against the counter, staring out the small window at the city lights twinkling in the distance, and felt a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment. Life was hard, and sometimes it felt overwhelming, but she knew that kindness, no matter how small, had the power to change lives. Mary sat quietly for a few minutes, letting the warmth of the tea seep into her hands, and whispered a promise to herself, that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would never stop helping others when she could, and she would continue to teach Liam the importance of compassion, empathy, and hope. The night grew deeper, and the city outside settled into its usual rhythm, but Mary felt a quiet peace. She had given, and in doing so, had been reminded of her own strength and the quiet beauty that existed even in life's struggles. And somewhere, she hoped, the elderly man sat down to rest that night, with a bit of food in his stomach and a renewed sense of hope in his heart, all thanks to the simple kindness of a single mother and her little boy. The next morning, Mary woke up before the sun, the soft gray light of early dawn spilling through the thin curtains of her small apartment. The air smelled faintly of the coffee she had left brewing in the corner, and Liam was still asleep, curled under his worn blanket with his little hands tucked under his chin. Mary quietly got out of bed, careful not to wake him, and went to the small kitchen to prepare a simple breakfast. She toasted a few slices of bread, scrambled some eggs, and poured a small glass of milk for Liam, all while thinking about the elderly man from the previous night. His face had stayed with her, lined and weary, and she wondered if he had found a safe place to rest. She thought about the city around them, the streets crowded with people rushing to work, cars honking, and the constant hum of life moving forward without pause, often ignoring the quiet struggles of those who were unseen. Mary had seen hardship many times in her life, but there was something about the old man that touched her deeply. She poured the eggs onto a small plate, grabbed a piece of bread, and carried the tray to Liam's bed, gently nudging him awake. "Good morning, honey," she whispered. Liam rubbed his eyes and yawned, smiling faintly at the smell of breakfast. "Morning, Mom," he mumbled, still half asleep. As they ate together, Mary encouraged Liam to eat slowly, savoring each bite, while reminding him about school and getting ready for the day. After breakfast, she helped him get dressed in his simple clothes, making sure his shoes were tied and his backpack was ready. She gave him a quick hug and a kiss on the forehead, sending him off with a reminder to be kind and to help others whenever he could. Once Liam had left for school, Mary returned to her small apartment, where the daily struggle awaited her. Bills were stacked on the counter, and the small kitchen sink held dirty dishes from the night before. She had a brief moment to herself, sipping her lukewarm coffee, thinking about the workday ahead. Her first shift at the diner would be long, and she knew it would test her patience and strength, but she faced it with determination. Mary dressed quickly, pulling on her worn jacket and tying her hair back, and stepped out into the brisk morning air. As she walked toward the bus stop, she thought again about the old man. Where would he be now? Did he have anyone to care for him? Mary had no way of knowing, but the thought made her chest ache with a mix of sorrow and hope. The city was alive with movement, shopkeepers opening their stores, school buses stopping to drop off children, and the occasional dog walker passing by with a cheerful wagging tail. Mary blended into the crowd, unnoticed, yet carrying in her heart the memory of the man's grateful eyes. At the diner, the morning rush had already begun. The air smelled of sizzling bacon and coffee, and the sound of plates clattering and orders being called filled the small space. Mary moved quickly, taking orders, serving food, and cleaning tables. Despite the exhaustion that weighed on her, she kept her smile steady, greeting customers politely and listening carefully as they spoke. Some of the regulars knew her by name and offered friendly words, but most were too busy to notice the quiet struggle behind her eyes. Between serving pancakes and refilling coffee cups, Mary's thoughts kept drifting back to the man she had helped. She imagined him wrapped in a blanket, maybe sitting somewhere warm, maybe still cold and alone. She wished she could do more, but her life was full of responsibilities, and she had little to spare. Still, the memory of his gratitude kept her going, reminding her why small acts of kindness mattered. During a brief break, Mary stepped outside for a moment, letting the cool morning air touch her face. She watched as people hurried along the sidewalks, some smiling, some frowning, and wondered how many of them would notice someone in need if they passed by. Mary thought about her own struggles, about raising Liam on her own, about the countless nights she had lain awake wondering how she would pay the rent or put food on the table. Life was hard, but helping someone else had reminded her that even in the darkest times, there was light to be found. As the day continued, the diner grew busier. Orders piled up, and Mary's hands moved quickly, chopping, stirring, and serving with practiced efficiency. She barely had time to think, yet her heart remained tethered to the thought of the elderly man. Every now and then, she caught herself staring at the door, imagining him walking in, and wondered if she might recognize him again. By mid-afternoon, Mary was exhausted, her feet aching and her back sore, but she forced herself to stay focused. She worked silently, her mind wandering between her duties and the hope that the man had found safety. During a short lull, she noticed a man sitting alone at a corner table, eating quietly. For a moment, her heart skipped a beat, thinking it might be him, but then she realized it was a customer, oblivious to her attention. She smiled faintly at herself, knowing her thoughts had been carried away by concern and empathy. As the day wore on, Mary's exhaustion grew, but she never allowed it to affect the kindness she extended to those around her. A regular customer dropped a few coins into her hand, thanking her for her service. A child visiting with their parent accidentally spilled milk on the floor, and Mary knelt to help clean it up, comforting the child with a gentle smile. Each interaction reminded her that her strength came not just from her determination to survive, but from her willingness to care for others despite her own struggles. Finally, after what felt like endless hours, Mary's shift ended, and she stepped outside into the fading light of the afternoon. The city streets were bathed in the golden hue of the setting sun, and she felt a small sense of relief wash over her. Her feet were tired, and her body ached, but her spirit was strengthened by the thought that she had done her best for those who crossed her path that day. As she walked home, she thought about dinner, about making a simple meal for herself and Liam, and about the stories she hoped to tell him about kindness and hope. When she arrived at her apartment, she was greeted by the familiar sound of Liam's laughter. He had returned from school, his backpack slightly worn from the day's use, and his eyes brightened when he saw his mother. Mary smiled, kneeling to embrace him, feeling the warmth of his small body against hers. They talked about his day, the small victories and struggles he had faced, and Mary listened carefully, offering encouragement and understanding. Later, as they prepared a modest dinner together, Mary's mind wandered back to the elderly man. She realized that her act of kindness had left a lasting impression, not only on him but also on Liam, who was learning the importance of empathy and compassion through his mother's example. That night, as she tucked Liam into bed, she whispered a quiet prayer for the man, hoping he would find warmth, food, and comfort. She kissed her son on the forehead, watching him fall asleep peacefully, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment despite the hardships that surrounded them. After cleaning up the small kitchen, Mary sat by the window, looking out at the city lights that twinkled like distant stars. She thought about the people in the streets, the ones who had no home, no food, no one to turn to, and felt both sadness and determination. Life had been challenging for her, but she knew that the smallest gestures of care could ripple out and touch lives in ways she could never fully see. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill her lungs, and resolved that she would continue to do her best not just for Liam, but for the world around her, even if only in small ways. Somewhere, she hoped, the elderly man had found shelter for the night, and that her small act of kindness had given him a glimmer of hope. Mary realized that life's struggles were inevitable, but they were made bearable by moments of connection, compassion, and love. She felt a quiet peace, knowing that she had acted with a full heart and that, in her own small way, she was making the world a little brighter. The following morning, Mary awoke once again to the soft gray light filtering through her thin curtains, carrying the familiar mixture of hope and worry that had become part of her everyday life. Liam was already up, quietly getting dressed and humming a small tune as he prepared for school, his little backpack slung over one shoulder. Mary watched him with a tender smile, admiring his innocence and resilience despite their modest circumstances. After a simple breakfast of toast and milk, she walked Liam to the bus stop, holding his hand tightly and reminding him to be kind and helpful, just as she had taught him. As they waited for the bus, she noticed the city beginning to stir, shopkeepers opening their doors, street vendors arranging their goods, and cars weaving through the crowded streets. Her thoughts drifted, as they often did, to the elderly man she had helped days before. She wondered where he might be now, if he had managed to find shelter for the night, and whether anyone else had extended the kindness she had given him. The thought made her heart ache and swell at the same time, a mix of concern and hope that had become familiar in her life. After waving goodbye to Liam as he climbed onto the bus, Mary made her way to the small bakery where she worked part-time in addition to her diner job. The bakery was warm and fragrant with the smell of freshly baked bread, sugar, and coffee, a temporary comfort against the harshness of the outside world. She greeted her co-workers, donned her apron, and began the familiar tasks of kneading dough, arranging pastries, and serving customers, all while keeping a careful watch on the clock to manage her time. The work was exhausting but steady, giving her a sense of purpose and routine, and she often reminded herself that each coin she earned brought a little more security to her and Liam's lives. Yet, even amid the repetitive tasks, her mind kept returning to the man she had helped. She imagined him finding a warm corner somewhere, sitting quietly and reflecting on the small gift he had received from strangers. Mary felt a strange connection to him, a sense of responsibility that tugged at her heart, even though she had no way of knowing his full story. During a brief lull in the bakery, she stepped outside for a few minutes, letting the fresh morning air wash over her. She looked down the street, noticing the people rushing by with their own worries and distractions, and wondered how many of them might stop to help someone in need if given the chance. Her thoughts returned to her own life, the struggles she faced as a single mother, the constant balancing of work, bills, and her son's needs, and yet she felt a quiet pride that she had been able to act with compassion despite everything. As the morning continued, Mary found herself reflecting on the lessons she wanted to teach Liam, not just about survival, but about the importance of kindness, empathy, and understanding. She thought about the way a small act, like sharing a sandwich, could ripple far beyond what one could see or imagine, and how the simplest gestures could change someone's day, or even their life. The bakery grew busy once again, with customers chatting, laughing, and occasionally dropping coins into Mary's hand in thanks. She served them all with the same gentle care she had learned to practice over the years, offering smiles, warm words, and sometimes a listening ear. Even in the midst of the busyness, her mind stayed tied to the thought of the elderly man. She imagined his face, the way his eyes had brightened at the sight of food, the small gesture of gratitude that had touched her so deeply. She wondered if he had family, friends, or anyone who truly cared about him, and wished she could do more than the little she had done. Hours passed, and the workday began to wind down. Mary cleaned the counters, organized the remaining pastries, and prepared to leave, all while feeling the familiar ache of tired muscles and a weary spirit. Outside, the afternoon sun cast a warm glow on the city streets, and Mary walked slowly, taking in the sights and sounds around her. The hum of traffic, the chatter of people passing by, and the occasional bark of a dog created a rhythm that reminded her of the world's constant motion, a world that moved on whether or not people noticed those who struggled within it. Mary's thoughts kept returning to the elderly man, and she wondered if she might see him again. She hoped he was safe, that he had found food, and that he had felt the warmth of human kindness even for a moment. As she approached her small apartment building, she noticed a figure sitting quietly on the curb, leaning against the wall of a nearby shop. For a brief moment, her heart skipped a beat, and she felt a rush of hope. Could it be him? She slowed her pace, careful not to startle him, and as she drew closer, she realized it was indeed the same elderly man. His eyes lifted toward her, and recognition sparked across his face. Mary felt her chest tighten as she approached, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Hello," she said softly, kneeling slightly to meet his gaze. I wasn't sure if I'd see you again," the man murmured, his voice trembling with gratitude. He introduced himself as Henry, and Mary offered him a small smile, asking if he had eaten since the last time they met. Henry shook his head, explaining that his situation had remained difficult, that he had struggled to find a safe place to sleep and food to eat, and that her kindness had been the only light he had encountered in days. Mary felt a deep pang of sorrow for him, wishing she could do more to ease his hardships. She handed him the small amount of money she had saved from her paycheck, enough to buy a simple meal, and watched as tears filled his eyes. "You have no idea how much this means to me," Henry whispered. Mary shook her head gently. "I don't need thanks. I just want you to be okay." For a few moments, they sat together on the curb, sharing quiet conversation. Henry told Mary small stories of his past, of times when life had been easier, when he had a family he loved and a home he could return to, and Mary listened intently, her heart heavy with both empathy and hope. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the city in hues of orange and pink, Mary realized that it was time to return to her apartment and prepare dinner for Liam. She helped Henry to his feet, guiding him to a nearby diner that offered inexpensive meals, and ensured he had something warm to eat before bidding him goodbye. On her walk home, Mary reflected on the strange and powerful way life had a way of connecting people. She thought about the delicate threads that tied human beings together, how acts of kindness, no matter how small, could create ripples far beyond immediate understanding. When she arrived at her apartment, Liam was waiting eagerly, his eyes bright and full of questions about her day. Mary smiled, embracing him, and told him about the small encounter she had just experienced, carefully explaining the importance of helping others and noticing the world around them. Liam listened attentively, absorbing her words and smiling as he realized the impact even simple gestures could have on someone's life. They prepared a small dinner together, talking and laughing quietly in their modest kitchen, sharing the warmth of family despite the day's fatigue and the ongoing struggles that lay outside their door. After dinner, Mary helped Liam with his homework, read a short story, and tucked him into bed, whispering reminders to always be kind and compassionate. Once he was asleep, she returned to the window, gazing out at the city lights that twinkled like distant stars, reflecting on the elderly man she had helped and the small but meaningful difference she had made in his life. Mary understood that the world was full of hardship and struggle, but it was also filled with opportunities to show care, empathy, and love. That night, she felt a quiet peace, knowing that even though her life was far from easy, her actions had touched another human being in a profound way. Somewhere in the city, Henry was eating a warm meal, perhaps feeling less alone, and Mary found solace in the thought that her simple act of kindness had made a difference. She resolved to continue helping others whenever she could, teaching Liam the same values of compassion and understanding, knowing that these small efforts could create lasting ripples of hope and humanity in a world that often forgot the power of care. The following morning, Mary awoke to the faint hum of the city outside her window, feeling the weight of exhaustion in her limbs but also the lingering warmth of hope in her heart. Liam was already up, brushing his teeth and humming a soft tune as he got ready for school, his small movements full of energy and innocence that Mary treasured deeply. After preparing a quick breakfast of toast and fruit, she walked him to the bus stop, holding his hand tightly as they navigated the crowded sidewalks. The city was alive with movement, people rushing to work, school children laughing, and cars honking in the distance, but Mary's thoughts kept returning to the elderly man she had helped, Henry. She wondered where he might be today, if he had been able to rest safely, and whether he had found even a fraction of comfort after the hardships he endured. The memory of his grateful eyes and gentle voice haunted her in a way that was both tender and painful, reminding her that the world was full of unseen struggles and small moments of human connection that could change lives. After waving Liam off as he boarded the bus, Mary made her way to the diner for her morning shift, her footsteps heavy but steady as she mentally prepared for another long day. The diner was bustling with customers, the smell of coffee and sizzling breakfast filling the air, and Mary moved quickly, taking orders, refilling drinks, and serving food with practiced efficiency. Though the work was tiring and often thankless, she found small satisfaction in the routine, in the moments when a customer smiled or thanked her for her care, and in the steady rhythm that allowed her to keep moving forward despite life's challenges. During a brief pause, Mary stepped outside for a moment, letting the cool morning breeze wash over her, and looked down the busy street. She imagined Henry somewhere nearby, perhaps searching for food, perhaps resting in a corner, and her heart ached with worry and empathy. She thought about how small acts of kindness, like giving him a sandwich or a few coins, could ripple far beyond what she could see, changing not just his day, but perhaps even his outlook on life. By mid-morning, Mary was serving tables, her hands moving swiftly while her mind remained quietly focused on the hope that Henry was safe and warm. She thought about the city as a whole, filled with people who were too busy to notice those in need, and yet, she knew that compassion could be found in the most unexpected moments. A regular customer dropped by, leaving a generous tip and thanking her for her work, and Mary felt a small thrill of satisfaction, reminding herself that even the smallest acknowledgement could bring a sense of value to someone's efforts. As the morning turned to afternoon, Mary's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice calling her name. She looked up, surprised, to see Henry standing near the diner entrance, looking a little cleaner than the last time she had seen him, and yet still frail and weary. Her heart leapt as she rushed to meet him. "Henry! You're here," she exclaimed softly, kneeling to speak to him at eye level. He smiled faintly, his eyes glistening with gratitude. "I remembered your kindness," he said quietly. "I wanted to see you and to thank you properly." Mary shook her head gently. "You don't need to thank me. I just wanted to help." Henry's voice grew emotional. "But you did more than help. You reminded me that people care. You reminded me that hope still exists." They talked quietly for a few moments, and Mary noticed a flicker of dignity returning to his posture, a small but powerful sign that her actions had truly made a difference. She asked him if he had eaten, and upon learning that he had not, she offered to buy him lunch, guiding him into the diner where they found a quiet table. As they shared a simple meal, Henry told Mary small stories of his past, of family and friends he had once loved, and of the hardships that had brought him to this point in life. Mary listened attentively, offering words of encouragement and understanding, feeling a profound connection forming between them. She realized that her empathy was not just a fleeting act of kindness, but a bridge that had given Henry a moment of dignity, a chance to feel seen and valued once again. Hours passed as they talked, the world outside the diner moving quickly, but inside that small space, time seemed to slow, filled with shared stories, quiet laughter, and the gentle warmth of human connection. Finally, Henry rose to leave, thanking Mary once again with a deep, heartfelt bow that brought tears to her eyes. "I will never forget you," he whispered. Mary smiled softly, feeling a mixture of sadness and fulfillment, knowing that she had given him more than food, she had given him hope. As she walked home later that evening, she reflected on the extraordinary way life worked, how a simple act of kindness could set off a chain of events that no one could predict. She thought about the lessons she wanted to teach Liam, about compassion, resilience, and the importance of noticing those around him who might be struggling. When she arrived at her apartment, Liam ran to greet her with a bright smile, full of energy and curiosity. Mary hugged him tightly, feeling the warmth of family and love in the midst of a world that was often harsh and unforgiving. Over dinner, they talked about their day, sharing small stories and quiet moments of joy, and Mary felt a deep sense of gratitude for the simple life they shared together. After tucking Liam into bed, she sat by the window, looking out at the city lights and thinking about Henry. She realized that kindness was not just about giving material things, but about offering respect, attention, and dignity to those who had lost hope. Somewhere in the city, she hoped, Henry was feeling a little stronger, a little less alone, and she knew that their meeting had changed something in him, as well as in her. Later that night, Mary reflected on her own life, the endless challenges she faced as a single mother, the uncertainty of the future, and yet, she felt a quiet sense of purpose. She had learned that life's difficulties were inevitable, but the ways in which people touched each other's hearts could bring meaning and light in even the darkest moments. She thought about the ripple effect of her actions, how one small act of generosity had reached Henry and might continue to influence others in ways she could not imagine. As she drifted to sleep, Mary made a silent promise to herself, that she would never stop noticing those in need, never stop showing compassion, and never stop teaching Liam that the world, despite its struggles, was full of opportunities for kindness. The night passed quietly, with the city settling into a gentle rhythm, and Mary felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond her exhaustion. She had given not just food, but hope, and she knew that this simple gesture could blossom into something far greater than she could see. She thought about Henry's story, about how life could change unexpectedly, and about the connections that were forged when people acted from the heart. Mary understood that her small acts of love and care could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she would never fully know, and she found comfort in the knowledge that she had lived with compassion that day. Somewhere, she imagined Henry resting safely, feeling nourished and valued, and the thought filled her with quiet joy. She realized that kindness was a powerful force, capable of bridging gaps, healing hearts, and reminding people that they were not forgotten. Mary knew that her life was far from easy, but she also knew that the moments in which she reached out to others created meaning and beauty in ways that no amount of struggle could erase. And as she finally closed her eyes that night, she felt a deep peace, knowing that her simple choices had brought hope, connection, and warmth into a life that had once known only loneliness. The next morning, Mary awoke to a strange feeling of anticipation, a gentle flutter in her chest that made her wonder what the day might bring. Liam was already up, humming softly as he got dressed, his small energy filling their tiny apartment with warmth. After preparing a simple breakfast of toast, fruit, and milk, Mary walked him to the bus stop, holding his hand tightly and reminding him to be kind to others, just as she had taught him over the years. The city was alive with the familiar bustle of people rushing to work, school children laughing, and cars honking as they navigated the crowded streets. Mary's mind, however, was elsewhere. She thought about Henry, the elderly man she had helped, wondering where he might be and whether he had managed to find some comfort for the night. Her heart ached for him, yet she felt a quiet hope that the simple act of kindness she had extended might still be making a difference in his life. After waving Liam goodbye as he boarded the bus, she headed toward the diner for her morning shift, her steps measured but determined. As she entered the diner, she noticed it was unusually quiet, almost as if the world had paused for a moment, giving her space to think. She moved behind the counter, greeting the few customers present, and began preparing orders, her mind filled with the memory of Henry's grateful eyes and the soft words of thanks he had whispered. Hours passed, the clatter of dishes and the murmur of conversation surrounding her, yet her thoughts continued to drift to the elderly man. She wondered if he had someone to care for him, if he had any family, or if life had always been this lonely and difficult for him. Then, during a brief lull in the morning rush, a man in a sharp suit walked into the diner, his presence commanding yet gentle, and approached the counter where Mary was serving. "Excuse me," he said politely, "are you Mary Thompson?" Mary blinked, surprised, and nodded slowly. The man smiled warmly. "My name is William Anderson. I believe you helped my father recently." Mary's heart skipped a beat, her mind racing to connect the dots. "Your father?" she asked cautiously. William nodded. "Yes. He spoke of a kind woman and her young son who gave him food when he had nothing. I had to meet you." Mary felt a wave of shock and disbelief wash over her. She had never imagined that a simple act of sharing a sandwich could reach someone so far beyond her understanding. William gestured toward the door, and Mary turned to see Henry walking slowly behind him, leaning slightly on his son's arm, his eyes brightening as they met hers. Mary's chest tightened as recognition and emotion flooded her at once. I didn't expect to see you again," she whispered, her voice trembling. Henry smiled, tears glistening in his eyes. "And I didn't expect to meet my daughter's new friend who reminded me that people still care," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. William explained that Henry had been struggling for a long time, that he had lost his home, and that life had been unbearably difficult, but Mary's act of kindness had become a story he told with warmth and gratitude. Mary listened in awe, realizing that her small gesture had reached far beyond what she had imagined. William continued, saying that he wanted to thank her in a way that reflected not just gratitude, but a chance to create a brighter future for her and Liam. Mary's eyes widened as William offered her support, a job opportunity at his company, resources to ensure she and Liam would no longer struggle to make ends meet, and a place to feel secure. Mary was speechless, her mind spinning with the sudden turn of events. She looked at Henry, whose eyes reflected a quiet pride and joy, and felt tears forming in her own. I just did what felt right," she said softly, her voice catching. Henry reached out and gently held her hand. "What you did was more than right. You gave me hope, and hope can change everything." Mary felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of fulfillment she had never experienced before, knowing that her simple act of kindness had come full circle. Liam, who had arrived with her, ran to Henry and hugged him gently, sensing the importance of the moment even in his young heart. Mary smiled, holding her son close, feeling the quiet power of compassion and human connection. William then spoke of plans to ensure Henry would live comfortably, surrounded by care and dignity, and Mary realized that this meeting was not just about gratitude, but about creating lasting change in their lives. The diner around them seemed to fade into the background, as if the world had narrowed to this one moment of reunion, hope, and transformation. Mary reflected on her life, the struggles, the long hours, the constant worry, and how, despite everything, she had chosen to act with compassion when it mattered most. Now, that simple choice had brought unimaginable joy, security, and connection into her life and the lives of others. Henry smiled at Mary one last time before William guided him gently toward the exit, and she watched, her heart full, as the father and son walked together, strong in the bond of family and gratitude. Mary turned to William, who extended a hand, smiling warmly. "We want to help you, Mary, in any way we can. Your kindness deserves to be honored and shared." Mary hesitated for a moment, overwhelmed by the turn of events, and then nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. She had always known the value of kindness, but she had never imagined it could come back to her in such a profound and life-changing way. That evening, Mary returned home with Liam, her heart light despite the exhaustion of the day, carrying with her the knowledge that her life, once filled with struggle and uncertainty, was beginning to transform. She cooked a small dinner with Liam, the two of them talking softly about the day, and she shared the story of meeting William and Henry again, carefully explaining the power of compassion and the unexpected ways it could return to touch one's life. After dinner, she tucked Liam into bed, kissing his forehead and whispering a promise that their lives were about to change for the better, thanks to the kindness that had started it all. Once alone, Mary sat by the window, gazing out at the twinkling city lights, reflecting on the extraordinary journey from that first evening when she had shared her small sandwich with a hungry stranger. She realized that life's difficulties, while real and challenging, were often balanced by the quiet beauty of connection, love, and gratitude. She thought about the ripple effect of kindness, how one small gesture could reach across lives and transform them in ways she could never fully predict. Mary understood, in a deep and profound way, that hope, compassion, and empathy were the true treasures of life, more powerful than any money, status, or material comfort. That night, she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment unlike anything she had known before. Somewhere in the city, Henry rested safely, cared for by his son and surrounded by support, and Mary knew that her simple choice had made that possible. She whispered a quiet prayer of thanks for the opportunity to touch someone's life, knowing that she and Liam would carry the lessons of kindness and hope forward forever. Mary closed her eyes with a full heart, understanding that life, no matter how difficult, had a way of rewarding those who acted with love, and that even the smallest gestures could spark profound change. The city slept quietly, unaware of the extraordinary moment that had unfolded within its streets, while Mary dreamed peacefully, knowing that her life, and the lives of those around her, were now filled with renewed hope, security, and the lasting power of human kindness.